إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا. من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلله فلا هادي له، وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وأشهد أن محمدا عبد الله ورسوله. أما بعد، فأوصيكم وإياي بتقوى الله عز وجل، فإنه الزاد في الدنيا والأخرى. كما قال الله تعالى في كتابه: يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله حق تقاته ولا تموتن إلا وأنتم مسلمون. My dear brothers and my dear sisters, there is a sickness and an illness within society that is very, very rampant, that we see and that we ourselves at times also indulge in. And that sickness is the sickness of mockery. And that sickness is the sickness of looking at other people and judging them and considering ourselves greater than them. And this sickness has a root cause from which it stems. And Allah Rabbul Izzati wal Jalal, through the story of Musa alayhi salam, had told us of the root cause for this sickness. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us when Musa alayhi salam had spoken to the Banu Israel in a verse because of which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had entitled a complete chapter within the Quran, the largest chapter within the Quran, and that is the chapter of Al-Baqarah. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us that Musa said to his people, Allah Rabbul Izzati wal Jalal is commanding you to slaughter a cow. And when he told them of this, they replied back to him and they said, قَالُوا أَتَتَّخِذُنَا هُزُوًا. They said, "O Musa, are you making a mockery out of us? Are you taking us up as a mockery? Are you making fun of us?" Musa, the Prophet Musa, a prophet who was among the ulul azmi min al-rusul, who was among the mightiest of messengers, a prophet who was among the greatest of messengers, a prophet who is mentioned the most in the Quran. There is no other prophet about whom Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives us more in the Quran than Musa. This prophet, of course, he's going to know what such a vile practice and such a vice within society and such an evil which happens to be very rampant in every society that goes corrupt, he would know what the root cause for this is. So he says, أَعُوذُ بِاللَّهِ أَنْ أَكُونَ مِنَ الْجَاهِلِينَ. I seek refuge from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that I become from the people who are ignorant. I seek refuge from ignorance. So he ended up grading ignorance to be the key factor because of which people end up making fun of one another, because of which people end up mocking one another. My dear brothers and my dear sisters, the more cultured we become, the more educated we become, the more developed we become, the more we should be away from this practice of mockery. The more we should recognize that Allah Rabbul Izzati wal Jalal has given everyone within limitations. If we see the limitations within others for which we mock them, there are reasons for people to be able to mock us if they use their tongue in that way as well. My dear brothers and my dear sisters, the person who mocks, he has ignorance in two different ways. In many ways, but two primary ways. The first way is that he believes himself to be greater than the person he's mocking, and for that reason he or she ends up mocking that individual. If he sees that that person's physical features are not like his, he may or she may mock that person's physical features because he believes himself to be greater. And he believes himself to be inherently superior. He believes that he is a better person. And such a person doesn't recognize truly the true knowledge of the fact that it is only through Allah's yardstick and through His index and through the index that Allah has placed on the Day of Judgment, it is through that that people will be judged. You may appear to be greater within this world, but in the hereafter that greatness doesn't help. Because it is Allah's index that will work on that Day of Judgment. It will be Allah's index, and that is the index of taqwa. And that is why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, Inna akramakum indallahi atqakum. It is the measure that Allah has placed for greatness, the measure that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has placed for honor is taqwa. And the greatest among you to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the most honorable amongst you to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala are the ones who happen to be the most righteous. So this is the first form of ignorance that this person may have. Another way this person may be ignorant is he believes that he should be greater. Not that he is greater, but he believes he should be greater. What does that mean? He sees a person who's better than him in many different ways. He sees a person who's got a better life going for himself. He sees a person who's perhaps more beautiful than him, more attractive than him. He sees a person who's more physically fit, maybe more rich, and so forth. So he wants to bring that person down in any which way, so he appears to be greater within the world, although he has internally already accepted that in this worldly life, person X appears to be greater than me. And this itself is another mistake. Why is that? Well, first and foremost, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala divides greatness within people in different ways. Maybe He is above you and beyond you in some manners, but you may be above and beyond Him in other manners. That's the first thing. The second thing is, at the end of the day, there are going to be people who have different levels within this world. This is a reality. This is a reality. But who is the one who is making that choice for the people? Along with the people's own actions, Allah through His divine decree and wisdom decides for people who will have more wealth and who will have more stealth. Allah decides for people who will have more health and who will have more faith. So this is a decision that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala makes. So by mocking someone to bring them down, you and I and whoever engages in this, we are basically objecting on the decree of Allah Rabbul Izzati wal Jalal. And that is another form of ignorance. And this is why the Prophet of God, Musa alayhi salam, when his people told him that you are mocking us, are you mocking us? Immediately, he didn't speak about mockery. He said, I seek a refuge in Allah Rabbul Izzati wal Jalal, that I be from those people who happen to be ignorant. I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to grant us culture. Allahumma ameen ya Rabb. I ask Allah Rabbul Izzati wal Jalal to grant us the ability to culture ourselves and our souls. Allahumma ameen. I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to educate our mind and nourish our souls. Allahumma ameen. Wa sallallahu ala sayyidina Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. بسم الله والحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله. الحمد لله حمدا يوافي نعمه ويكافئ مزيده، وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. أوصيكم وإياي بتقوى الله عز وجل، فهو القائل في كتابه: يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله وقولوا قولا سديدا يصلح لكم أعمالكم ويغفر لكم ذنوبكم ومن يطع الله ورسوله فقد فاز فوزا عظيما. My dear brothers and my dear sisters, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He tells us in Surah Al-Hujurat, He says, يَا أَيُّهَا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا, O who you believe, لَا يَسْخَرْ قَوْمٌ مِّن قَوْمٍ عَسَىٰ أَن يَكُونُوا خَيْرًا مِّنْهُمْ وَلَا نِسَاءٌ مِّن نِسَاءٍ عَسَىٰ أَن يَكُنَّ خَيْرًا مِّنْهُنْ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says that, O who you believe, do not allow men amongst you to mock other men. Perhaps the men who are being mocked happen to be greater than the ones who are mocking. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, do not allow the women amidst you to mock other women. Perhaps the ones who are being mocked may be better than the ones who are mocking. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has His own measures for greatness. It is not you who decides other people to be great. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has a completely different index by which He judges. And He has left that judgment to Himself and for the day of judgment. It is not your duty to judge. Because by mocking others, you are accepting your own weaknesses. And that is why many psychologists say that mocking within a human being is a sign of a psychological disorder. And that is because he is taking his own weakness and he's trying to impress and he's trying to admit them onto other people. I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to allow us to correct our weaknesses instead of reflecting them onto other people. Allahumma ameen. وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. ربنا آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار وأدخلنا الجنة مع الأبرار يا عزيز يا غفار. وأقم الصلاة إن الصلاة تنهى عن الفحشاء والمنكر ولذكر الله أكبر والله يعلم ما تصنعون. وأقم الصلاة.